Hey everybody, Nick Beadleston from Good Impacts here, and I've got Matt Earley with me. Thanks for joining us for our 30-minute webinar on 5 things somebody really should have told me before I started my ethical business. This webinar is being presented by Good Impacts. We help guide ethical entrepreneurs along their business journey. To that end, we provide a number of great resources, everything from project design and implementation all the way through to aiding in systemic industry change. We also provide a handful of specific services for nonprofits. If you're interested in finding out more about that, please feel free to go to goodimpacts.com. Couple of quick housekeeping notes. Everybody's video and audio is automatically turned off. Please leave it muted for the duration of our conversation. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function that should be at the bottom mid to left of your Zoom panel at the bottom of the screen. We'll have 8 to 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of Matt's presentation. And this webinar is being recorded for future educational use, so we can send it out to the millions and billions of folks who had something better going on today. Couple of quick notes about me so we can get to the much more interesting Matthew J. Earley. I started Good Impacts in 2018 to support ethical business, provide resources and guidance for those organizations that are really trying to create systemic change through their everyday operations. I have a background in communications and journalism. I've worked with and for a number of really cool nonprofits, both at home and abroad. I've worked on supply chain and community development issues, especially in the specialty coffee world, which is how Matt and I first got connected. And before all that, I spent a little bit of time hanging out with the Army. So much more interesting is Matt's history, and he's a pretty modest guy, but he's going to go into some of his exploits. He's worked for years to be an advocate for ethical and transparent coffee sourcing. It's a $50 billion a year industry worldwide annually. And unfortunately, transparency is not a major concern for much of that industry. So Matt and his colleagues have worked hard to change that. A lot of that work has been done through the U.S. and Canadian importing cooperative coffees. Now Matt's working in the environmental and energy sector in Wisconsin, creating some really cool changes there. And he's also consulting with a variety of companies, both in the U.S. and abroad, on how they can improve the transparency and the ethos of their supply chain. Am I missing anything major there, Matt?
No, you're hitting it.
I wanted to share this picture of us literally shoveling shit in Nicaragua to get a good sense of what some of our coffee farming colleagues have to do every day absent heavy equipment. And I don't know why, but this picture always makes me laugh. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt, and he's going to tell you about 5 things somebody should have told him before he got his business rocking and rolling.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks to everybody who decided to come today and participate in this webinar. It's kind of a lightning webinar, so I'm going to be moving pretty fast, or attempting to, which is a challenge for me because I like to talk. Yeah, just setting the stage for this conversation about ethical business. I want to just say that part of starting an ethical business is having a really clear vision, something that you're really feeling strongly, and often it's going to seem, it can seem strange to business experts who are out there. And I just, I think it's important to listen and to consider the thoughts and input from other people, but in the end, no matter who that person is, you know what your vision is, and you know what you can accomplish better than anybody. And so I really want to encourage people not to be discouraged when they're getting feedback that doesn't necessarily align with where they think they need to go, and just to say, when it comes to ethical business, we're often a half step to a step ahead of the industries that we are getting into. And so remember that not everybody can see above the horizon the way that you can, and if you're really feeling it in your heart, and it's going to work, don't let anybody dissuade you, including experts in webinars. So I just wanted to say that moving into this. So that being said, there are some things that I wish that someone would have told me before we started our coffee roasting cooperative, Just Coffee, here in Madison, Wisconsin. We started it back in 2001, myself and the co-founder, Mike Moon, a good friend of mine. And we had a very strong idea of what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it. But beyond that, we had no real idea or business acumen. And sometimes that worked really well to our advantage for the reasons that I was just talking about, because we didn't want to do things the orthodox way that the coffee industry had been doing them. And frankly, we saw a lot of problems with the way the coffee industry was operating at that time as a whole, and specialty coffee in particular. But there are some things that I really wish we would have either researched, or we would have listened a little bit more, or we would have gone out and sought advice from people who had already been in our shoes a little bit. The first one I'd like to talk about is the inescapable power of math. When we started our business, we wanted to do everything. We wanted to do it as fast as possible. We wanted to pay farmers more than any other coffee company out there. We wanted to pay really great wages to ourselves and to people who were joining up in our fledgling co-op. We wanted to pay 100% health benefits for everybody, best health benefits we could buy. We wanted a spot in our neighborhood, which close to downtown Madison was not the cheapest place to be starting a business, but it was where our natural consumer base was going to be starting out, and people who aligned with us. And so we just wanted to do everything. And because of that, we really struggled, and we supplemented, and we barely some years broke even. And the stress of not making money in our business really led us to make decisions that I think eventually some of them compromised our initial vision. And we did that almost out of desperation. And that wasn't necessary if we had really planned more realistically and prioritized the things that we wanted to do, and had them lined up in a way that we could have done them a little bit more sustainably. The action, I guess, coming out of this is that when you're starting your business, make a plan that allows you to accomplish your goals, but again, prioritize them. Make sure that you have an approach that allows you to pay yourselves and pay your bills as you check them off the list. If you're starting a for-profit business, inevitably math wins the day. And if you're not making enough money to pay your bills and pay your suppliers and pay your staff and yourselves, you're not doing anybody any good. So that has to be a balance that's considered as you are starting your business and as your business grows and hopefully thrives. Second one I want to talk about is consider, when you're starting out, the best business structure for your business. We decided really early on that we wanted to be a worker cooperative, and we did that because it lined up really well with our values and our farmer partners' structures that they were working with, and also with our natural sort of clientele base. And cooperatives are an amazing idea, and they're often executed very well. That said, none of us ever really took the time in the beginning to really understand how a cooperative worked. And how it was designed legally, what the advantages and limitations are to being a worker co-op, what the ramifications of our bylaws would mean later on, and how our business would need to grow and change over time. basically in the beginning, we allowed a lawyer to write our bylaws in a very sort of, basic standard way. And we didn't really consider what they meant and how they would either help us or, even hinder us as we grew. So by the time I left Just Coffee, it really didn't resemble a traditional worker co-op in the way that most of us think about that. So the action item coming out of this, or action items, really do a lot of research on the pros and cons of different business structures, and think about the business structure, the legal structure that makes the most sense to you, and make sure that it can, the legal realities of it can match up to your ideals and what your idea is for your business. Think about how you want the business to look in the future and how that structure will need to change over time. And make sure that your legal structure has flexibility that you need to grow into the business that you envision. And make sure that you're always grounding yourself in that structure and understanding as your business grows and as you grow as a business leader, you will need to have a deeper understanding of how that structure is affecting your business, and you want to be able to react and to be able to change things as needed. And different legal structures, whether it's an LLC or a worker co-op or C Corp, whatever it is, a B Corp, they all have certain limitations and advantages. And so I would really encourage you to think about that in the beginning. 3, think really hard about the roles that your business will need and who's going to fill those roles. When we started Just Coffee, we literally gave ownership to anyone who walked in the door and expressed interest. Literally, we had people, I think the first 3 people other than Mike and myself walked into the door. We didn't really know them. They expressed interest and alignment with us politically. And so, we welcomed them on board. There really wasn't any consideration of what role anyone, coming in at that time, probably for the first 5 to 8 years of the business, what their roles could really evolve into, what their natural strengths were, what our needs would be as a business, how they interacted with us in a team setting. Or anything else. And again, our supposition was that, if they supported our generally anti-capitalist take on being a business, like they were in. We also didn't ask a whole lot of people who were coming in terms of what they were investing in the business. And I really would caution anybody starting a business to think about that and the value of the business for people who you are especially extending ownership to. That's worth something, and it's going to be worth even more later on. So make sure that when people are coming in the door, that they don't just, you don't just like them personally, or they don't just align with your ideals and your ethics and your political beliefs, but make sure they have skin in the game, because when they have skin in the game, they're much, they will be much more in alignment with you in a deeper way as the business grows and evolves. Over time, we really made, some mistakes, I think, with folks who we went into business with, and we wound up, eventually sometimes being at odds with some of the people who were our partners. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people or that we were bad people. It just really meant that they didn't, they just weren't good fits for the business that we started. And, eventually that caused a bit of, it could cause issues. It caused low intensity conflict and factionalization within our business. And it was really a serious and unnecessary bummer. So action items associated with that: be really choosy and deliberate about who you go into business with. Think about how they will fit down the road. You can have a beer with anybody, but you don't want to go into business with everybody. It's just something to consider. Having similar values and beliefs is a really good consideration, but also consider their skill sets, how they work in a team setting, what they want in the future, and what the roles are going to be that you need in the future. As you differentiate, you're going to need someone who's really good at finances. You're going to need someone who's really good at, depending on what your business is, in our business, logistics or sourcing, salespeople. And think about people who you were bringing in at the time and how they're going to be able to fit into sort of a stratified business as you continue to grow. when you find the right fit, help cultivate the development of the people who you're in business with, and cultivate their development, their leadership, and it's going to pay really huge dividends as they grow with you and your business. And lastly, if someone isn't fitting in, have the respect for them and for yourself in the business to have a mutually beneficial, honest conversation with them early on, and figure out if you can continue on with them. Number 4, flex your vision muscle. And what I mean by that, I guess for us at Just Coffee, our initial thought when we started it was we just really wanted to create jobs for ourselves, and to sell coffee grown by friends we had made in southern Mexico. And that was it. That was our vision. We knew how we wanted to operate. We knew what our ethics were going to be, and we didn't want to back off of those, but we really never thought about what we wanted to be when we grew up, or how that business was going to look over time. When we started becoming more successful, it was like a cross between like a good dream and a really absurd joke. And instead of looking at that success and trying to chart some kind of trajectory out of it, we just kind of laughed and marveled and kept moving forward one step at a time without really looking out into the future. And this led to a real lack of focus for us, an inability to make growth decisions, and actually some choices that I think wound up being precedents that we really couldn't back away from later on, that we wish we really would have thought about in a different way, or thought about more deliberately. So when you are when you're planning your business, really think about what you want your business to look like in 20 years. And it doesn't have to be super detailed, but think about how big do you want to be? How many employees do you want to have? What will your footprint look like? How much revenue do you think your company should be bringing in at that point? And think about how that will relate, how that will look like when you do it with your business values and ethics still firmly intact, because that's what's going to make your business special, right? After you have that 20-year vision, work your way backwards and think about, well, okay, if I'm going to be there in 20 years, what are we going to look like in 10? And then what are we going to look like in 5? And then what are we going to look like in 3? And really write it down. Decide what your metrics are, or what those touch points are, and write that down. And remember that, as you move forward, these aren't set in stone. It's totally possible that they're going to change. When they do change, when you find yourself going in a different direction, make sure you're doing it deliberately, and acknowledge it, and you can make adjustments in your vision document. But always know if and how you're on track to your 20-year vision, and be able to make adjustments if you're not. Finally, 5th, have an exit strategy. Not only did we not make future plans as a business at Just Coffee, but I didn't make plans as an individual. And my friend Mike Moon and I, when we started Just Coffee, I was, I think, 30 years old. And at that stage in my life, I was really only thinking about having something lined up when I got out of grad school. I just needed a job that I felt good about, and so I wanted to turn my ethics and my values into a situation where I could make a living. I loved being an entrepreneur and starting an ethical business, but I never really stopped to think about what would happen as that business grew, and as it became more like a standard business. And I didn't think about, what it would look like when I wanted to leave, and how I would do that. In our case, we found that many co-ops put things in place, apparently, in order to compensate the founders and old school workers, for founding the business, but we did not do that. And because the co-op model doesn't include appreciating stock, and because we weren't concerned about our exit strategy in the future, we didn't put anything in place. So I left Just Coffee really with very little, even though I was the founder of it. Mike and I both left within a couple of years of each other. And when we were leaving on our way out, we very belatedly brought up the idea of some kind of payout if the business ever sold after we left. And to no surprise, the current owners they weren't really interested in that. That wasn't in the bylaws that we had been operating under, and we created those bylaws. So it's not on them. for not wanting to belatedly change the structure to reward us. If that was something that we were interested in the beginning, and I wish at age 50 it would have been, we should have done that in the beginning, thinking about it and put that into the bylaws so that it would be uncontroversial and it would be a cornerstone, in the business. But we didn't. So it's a bummer, but if and when I start another coffee business, I will have that in mind moving forward. So action items: have an honest conversation with your inner future retiree and your significant others, and think about how long you want to work in that business. What are your personal goals? How do they line up with that timeline? And set yourself up in the very beginning, knowing that at some point, you're going to want to leave that business. And if you do it right, it will still be a healthy, continuing business. So you have to set up a way for you to get out of the business when you want, and with something that you think is fair. Figure out what your founder value is. Really think about what's fair to everybody, and then work with a lawyer in the beginning to enshrine that into your business organizational document, and then it will be totally uncontroversial and it will be done moving forward. Have an exit strategy.
Boom.
All right, that's what I got.
Yeah, so that was phenomenal, Matt. Thanks for all that value into such a short time. Sorry for making you squeeze 2 decades into less than 20 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick. We're going to do just a couple of minutes of Q&A because we are running short on time. And then we'll share some ways for everybody to get a hold of Matt. So they can ask any follow-up questions if need be. Yeah, but one question, let's see, that we have, Matt. Folks are curious about if the co-op structure, if it had been set up a little more intentionally, was that the right structure for you guys, or was it a question of picking the fundamentally wrong structure from the get-go?
I definitely think it was the right structure for us. We just didn't do any due diligence into what a co-op actually was. We had this sort of amorphous idea that as it turned out, was really more of a collective, which is everybody makes decisions about everything, together. It's what we found out down the road is that collective is more of a management style, and cooperative is more of an ownership structure. So yeah, I think we totally could have done it. I look at even another, like Equal Exchange, another coffee roasting cooperative, and they were very deliberate and were much smarter about the way that they started their cooperative, in my opinion. And so yeah, I'm a super co-op enthusiast still to this day.
Another question about supply chain transparency and what you can do about that if you're not in the coffee world, if you don't have the option of tracing, your beans back. That's a luxury in that industry that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you just have to, if you're making that a sort of a bedrock piece of your business, start with that and get in touch with find either folks in your industry who are already engaging in traceability, so that you at least know kind of what direction to go in terms of what suppliers you should be working with, or just spend the time and the energy that you need in order to make the connections and to get in touch with suppliers who you can have that kind of traceability with. And in the coffee world, there are all kinds of importers who have various levels of traceability, but we're members of co-op coffees, which is our next level of cooperative. And that was as our coffees sort of our importers, that was a huge part of what they wanted to accomplish too. So that allowed us to keep our business model kind of front and center and intact in terms of traceability and having the relationships with farmers in this case.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's a couple more questions, but so many of these are, they could be their own 30-minute conversation. These are complicated issues. So we may have to stop it here just so we can honor that 30-minute time limit. But I think based on these questions, we're going to have to talk about doing this again before too long.
I'd love to. That'd be great.
In the meantime, though, for folks that do want to reach out to Matt, you can get a hold of him through his website, monkeywrenchconsulting.com. You can shoot him an email at monkeywrenchconsulting@gmail, and you can listen to his music projects. The Delegate on Spotify, iTunes, Bandcamp, SoundCloud. Just hang out next to your neighbor's house, listen to their speak.
Yeah, I recommend starting there.
It's free.
Yeah, it is.
Couple of ways to stay connected with us at Good Impacts. You can visit our website, sign up for our newsletter, or you can always feel free to drop me a line, nick@goodimpacts.com. Anything else, Matt, to say to the nice people before we call it a day?
No, I just really appreciate it. I think we should do this again and maybe make it an hour so that we can take a little bit more time and ask more questions and stuff. But yeah, thanks for hanging out, everybody. I really appreciate your interest, and please do contact me with any questions or just to chat.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks you all.